Covering Dunkirk, Fredonia, and all of northern Chautauqua County, this is WCVF 88.9 FM, The Voice.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Big Blue Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Volz, a sophomore here at SUNY Fredonia. I almost said freshman. Geez, you would think that I'd be adjusted to that by now. We got a good show for you today. We've got a lot going on with Fredonia sports. A lot of teams in action today. Is on campus. There's a few that are on the road. The women's tennis team is actually concluding their season today, or their regular season, I should say, because the SUNYAC tournament, the SUNYAC playoffs, will begin next week, I believe it is. So a lot to get to today in terms of Fredonia sports. Yep, I'm going to talk about the Bills. I know that I don't know that anybody wants to necessarily hear about the Bills or what's going on with the Bills right now, but yeah, so I'll address it. Of course, the Sabres regular season is set to begin tomorrow night. They are at home taking on the New York Rangers at 7 o'clock p.m. The Party in the Plaza festivities should be starting around 5-ish. We'll see then, they have the players kind of walk in with like the whole red carpet, all that, pomp and circumstance and all that sort of good stuff. So we'll see how that goes. As far as the Sabres opener, they've got a tough test, of course, starting out against the New York Rangers and their white-hot goaltender, Igor Shesterkin, who is just absolutely dominant. Guy turns into a brick wall when it really matters. But another thing we got going on is baseball playoffs. So those are really starting to heat up. Our one team has already punched their ticket to the ALCS, that team being the Texas Rangers, but I'll get to that later. And then, of course, breaking down last week's NFL scores and all that sort of stuff and previewing next week. And maybe I'll give a little bit of a shout-out to my fantasy football team who is 5-0 because I don't know. It's kind of fun to have an undefeated fantasy football team when, I have so many people tell me, oh, my fantasy team is just terrible this year. My receivers or my running backs are terrible. And then I'm sitting there, I'm sitting pretty at 5-0 because I got all sorts. I got my running backs are loaded, but I'll get to my fantasy team later. On to Fredonia sports to start. The men's soccer team is at home tonight. They're taking on Brockport at 7 o'clock in one of their last SUNYAC games of the season because they got Brockport at home tonight. Then they host Oneonta at 1 o'clock on Saturday. And then next week, their last home game of the season is a week from today. The fall sports season is coming to a close. They are at home against Penn State Behrend a week from today at 6 p.m. And then they finish out the regular season next Saturday, October 21st, at New Paltz in a SUNYAC matchup. Their most recent game, they lost at home to Plattsburgh. Because right now, they're in a stretch of 5 straight home games. They had tied with Oswego last Wednesday. And then this past Saturday, falling at home to Plattsburgh 2-1. They'd scored early in that game, and then Plattsburgh got to, early in the second half. There were a lot of yellow cards in that game. There were, if I remember correctly, there were 10 yellow cards in total in that game. So it was not exactly a game that the Blue Devils are going to want to remember, but, you live and you learn. And their record right now, they're still sitting above 500. So, it's still going, I would say, certainly better than last season. They went 4-9-3 last season. So right now, I think I would think that they would probably be good to go for the SUNYAC playoffs. I would think that they would be set. But you never know. They're going to have to take care of business in some more of these, end of the season SUNYAC games. On to the women's soccer team. They're still sitting at 500. They're 5-5-2, 2-3-1 in conference play. They are at Brockport later this afternoon. That game getting started at 4 o'clock. They were at Plattsburgh on Saturday. They lost 1-0. Their last 3 games have been, they had a win they had a win, a tie, and then a loss. So at Brockport, later today at 4 o'clock, at Oneonta on Saturday at 1. Then 2 home games next week to close out the regular season. They're at home against Penn State Behrend next Tuesday night at 6 p.m. and then home against New Paltz on Saturday at 1. Again, the women's soccer team looking like they're probably a safe bet to be in the SUNYAC playoffs, but crazy things can happen towards the end of the season. So they're definitely going to have to make sure that they take care of business in at least one or two of those games towards the end of the season because, last year the men's soccer team knows this well. Last year the men's soccer team missed the playoffs by just 1 point. So, they certainly know that feeling well. As far as men's and women's cross country, they are finishing up their regular season on Saturday. They were at Houghton last week, and they will be at Geneseo for a little bit of a conference meet on Saturday. And then after that, they've got, it just says the meet starts at 11 a.m. Not exactly sure what time the men's team runs, what time the women's team runs. Geneseo will host that meet, of course. And then this is the last meet of the regular season. Then they got 2 weeks off. And then October 28th is going to be the SUNYAC Championships. That's a Saturday. That will be in Oneonta, as SUNY Oneonta will host that. And then the Division III Regional Championships, if Fredonia can maybe get there, you never know, will be hosted by Houghton on Saturday, November 11th. And, of course, the women's team and the men's team, they travel together. The swim and dive, we talk about, fall sports coming to an end. Your winter sports are getting started as well as the men's and women's swimming and diving teams started last week, this past Saturday. They both had a meet at Pitt Bradford down in Bradford, which if anybody doesn't know where Bradford, PA is, it's just south of the New York-Pennsylvania border, about an hour and a half or so from here. So basically, it was just a head-to-head between Fredonia and Pitt Bradford. The women's team took home the win. The men's team ended up losing. But the men's team, they've got a very small team this year. They only have 4 guys. They only have a few guys on their team. So, it's a small team. But for it being a small team, they actually did well in some of their events. They ended up falling 115-48, which looks like, oh, geez, it got blown out. But when you only have 4 guys on your team, there's really not much you can do with that. But so they're going to be off this week. Both teams will be off this week. And both will be at home not this coming Saturday, but the Saturday after that, the 21st. The men's team will be hosting Hobart College, and the women's team will be hosting William Smith College, both in out-of-conference matchups. Well, the hockey season is getting started soon, not quite this weekend. They've got a big scrimmage coming up, and I don't know that a lot of people on campus necessarily know about it. It's next Friday, the 20th. They're taking on, it's the All-Stars from the Eastern Hockey League, which the Eastern Hockey League is a developmental league with a lot of 18 and 19-year-old players. It's basically, so hockey is a lot different than other sports. You think about football or basketball, a lot of players, they graduate high school and they go straight to college to play their sport. That's not really the case for hockey. In hockey, a lot of times players will play junior hockey for a year or two first and then play college hockey. So college hockey players are a little bit older than some of the other athletes on campus. And a lot of Fredonia's players on this team actually played in the EHL previously. And the head coach of the EHL All-Stars is also the head coach of the Boston Junior Rangers, which is a team in the EHL that several players on this Blue Devils roster played for. So a handful of Fredonia players, I should say, are actually going to be taking on their former coach and players who are currently playing for their former team. So it's going to be a really neat little scrimmage that they've got going on, and that game is Friday, October 20th in the Steel Hall Ice Arena at 7 p.m. The women's volleyball team has a little while left. Their season goes on a little bit longer than the other fall sports, so they are in action. They've been off for a week or so. They were at Buff State last Wednesday. They'll be at Brockport on Friday at 6 p.m., then at Geneseo Saturday at 1. They've got 2 more home games this season. Their last 2 home games are next weekend. They've got Friday, October 20th at 6 o'clock. They host Cortland. And then their last home game of the season is Saturday, October 21st at home against Oswego. So that will be their senior night. The regular season ends November 4th. They have a handful of different matches. They've got some non-conference matchups at the end of the season as well. And the women's tennis team, finally, the women's tennis team, of course, a lot was made that they won their first match in so long when they had beaten Houghton back on September 11th. And they actually ended up winning another match last weekend. If my laptop will load, I could see it. But, yeah. So their record's sitting at 2-9. It finally loaded. All right, we'll take it. So the record's sitting at 2-9. They actually ended up beating Plattsburgh, finished out the conference slate strong. They beat Plattsburgh 5-4 last Saturday to improve their record to 2-9. And as I mentioned in the open of the show, they are going to be finishing up their regular season tonight. They are at Penn State Behrend at 6 p.m. So definitely, I'll definitely be keeping tabs on that. And it's exciting. I mean, I know that you look at the overall record and you think, 2-9, geez, that was a rough season, which is not wrong necessarily. But at the same time, you got to think about where they were. You got to think about where they were before this season. I mean, before they won that match against Houghton back on September 11th. Before they won that match, they had lost, I think it was 16 straight matches. So they had not won since, if anybody hadn't heard, they had not won since April 25th of 2021. So, I mean, it was a big way to, you get that first win. It's like remember when the Browns won for the first time in 2.5 years ago? It wasn't that long, but when the Browns won for the first time in a long time, years ago, it was, it's a big weight lifted off of their shoulders. And that way, you move on to next season, because they had some good matches. They really did. They had some where, they were right in it down to the wire in a lot of their different matches, but ultimately, at the end of the day, they were not able to come away with the win. But they've been able to come away with 2 wins so far on the year. So that's a look at your Fredonia sports. I'll come back and talk a little bit about the baseball playoffs, because those are really starting to heat up now. And then later on in the show, I will get to the Bills' disaster overseas. Eventually, I will get to that. And then I also want to preview the Sabres season and talk about who I think is going to be in the playoffs for hockey. Spoiler alert, I think Buffalo makes it. I think this is the year the drought ends for the Sabres. But anyways, thanks for tuning in to Big Blue Sports Podcast here on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia.
Advertised believing you were free. A balloon so high its rupture won't be seen. The space between your hands was all you knew. Where the solitude you molded only grew. Here now above the throne, you stumble through a canyon in the night, free to roam but only out of sight. We're driving through those woods between where your laughter once concealed what you would take. Here, still above the throne, here, still above the throne. Beyond the edges of our sight, and the only sound It's ever on your mind. The shifting sands beneath your feet, where the moon slips out and dances on the sea. Tracing your lines in the sand. The silence of the everlasting flame flickers in the darkness of your eyes. Echoes in the caverns of your mind. You can hear, searching for a place of endless quiet. Here, still above the throne, you can feel the final breath you'll take before the plunge. Here, too. You can see a hand that plants a seed you hope will grow. Tremors underneath your chest, beating time to gestures of the figures in your dust. A solitude that's truly free, reflection in the mirror of the sea. Tracing your lines in the sand. Tracing your lines.
And welcome back to Big Blue Sports Podcast. So I talked about before I headed out on break, I wanted to talk about the Major League Baseball playoffs. So the ALCS is getting close to being set. We've already got one team. I mentioned that one team has already punched their ticket to the ALCS, that team being the Texas Rangers, as they ended up sweeping the number one seed Baltimore Orioles. But a great season for the Orioles nevertheless. I mean, Baltimore, for everything that they've gone through over the last several years, you know, their fans deserve a winner. I mean, I know what it's like from being a Sabres fan my entire life, that it is incredibly difficult and it wears on you when your team is just completely terrible year after year after year, and your organization messes absolutely everything up year after year after year, and it just becomes painful as a fan. Believe me, I know better than a lot of other people what that's like. I've been a Buffalo sports fan all my life. Of course, I know failure very well. But Baltimore fans, you know, I don't think that you can look at this season as a disappointment at all. I know that they're probably crushed. You know, you get to the postseason and you don't even win a single game. You ended up getting swept by the Texas Rangers. But you've also got to keep in mind, that's a really good Texas team. That Rangers team is phenomenal. They've got good pitching. They've shelled out good money for their lineup, too. And the Orioles, not to mention, yes, they had such a great regular season. And yeah, you look at, okay, number one seed getting swept in the ALDS. But the Orioles are such a young baseball team with more young talent on the way. The Orioles almost remind me, they like mirror the Sabres almost exactly. Because you talk about this is a very young team that's just sort of coming into their own. They've got loads of young talent on their roster with even more on the way. So, this is a team that, yes, it's not the outcome that Orioles fans wanted this year, but there's a lot to be proud of, and there's a lot to be excited about for this team moving forward. Other series, we'll go back to the wild card. I'll retrace my steps here. In the American League, the Minnesota Twins, all of the series ended in sweeps, by the way. In the American League, the Minnesota Twins, the 3 seed, taking down the 6 seed Toronto Blue Jays 2-9. The 5 seed Texas Rangers beating the 4 seed Tampa Bay Rays 2-0 as well. And you saw in those 2 games, the attendance numbers in St. Petersburg were shockingly low. I mean, I think it was game 1. They only had 19,000 fans in that ballpark. For a playoff game, you've got a ballpark that seats like 40 to 45,000 fans. You only get 19,000, less than half your capacity. What? Like, for a playoff game? That's unbelievable. I mean, take a look at the New York Mets or the St. Louis Cardinals. Of course, I had to shout out the Cardinals. I'm a Cardinals fan, but those are 2 teams that were, well. If I talked about my true opinions on how the Cardinals season went, I don't think I would have enough time left in the show because there's a lot there, but we'll save that for another time. Those are 2 teams that they knew they were out of the playoffs with multiple weeks to go in the regular season. I mean, there were regular season games that these teams were already out of that they were selling out their stadium. And I get it, for the Cardinals, it's different because it was like, the milestones of Adam Wainwright's retirement. But for them and kind of for the Padres too, like teams that had massively disappointing seasons, the Yankees too, teams that had incredibly disappointing seasons were still selling out their games left and right towards the end of the regular season. And the Tampa Bay Rays can't even get half of their stadium full for a playoff game. Yikes. That's raw. I don't know how to feel about that, but it's not a good feeling. Let me tell you, that's not good. And for the city of St. Petersburg or Tampa or wherever they decide to put their new stadium when they tear down the atrocity that is Tropicana Field, don't get me wrong, it's terrible. It's probably the worst venue in professional sports. What are they like? How are you going? You got to think of it from a standpoint of the team is almost trying to sell themselves to the city, right? In order to get a new stadium built. Like, that's why the Bills were able to get a new stadium built, right? Because the Buffalo Bills mean so much to the community of Western New York and, the town of Orchard Park that, of course, they're going to build a new stadium for them and not risk losing the team, right? For the Rays, it's like, how do you market to the city that your fans care if you can't even sell out half of a playoff game? That's the type of thing that makes city lawmakers and all that go, well, why should the city and the county and the state fork over a bunch of money for you to build a new stadium when there's no fan interest? They could determine, what? It's not worth the investment. And either say, okay, Rays, either keep playing at Tropicana Field or we'll call your bluff. You say you're going to leave? Okay. That's the type of thing that can happen when your attendance numbers are incredibly low, right? I mean, it's a scary thing to think about. Like, as a fan of small market teams, losing my teams is like one of my biggest fears. This is literally true. I have actually had nightmares about the Bills and Sabres leaving Buffalo. So I wouldn't want the Rays to move, and I don't think they're going to, but it's just a thought to put out there that, like, if your fans aren't even showing up to playoff games, then how in the world are you going to market yourself to the city and make the city believe that it's a good investment to spend however many $1 million? Or stadium costs are ridiculous now, but, you know, are you really going to get the city of St. Petersburg or the city of Tampa to give you $500 million to build a new baseball stadium when you're only getting 19,000 fans in for a playoff game? I don't know. That's kind of a tough thought. Anyways, moving on past that point. In the National League wildcard round, the Philadelphia Phillies sweeping the Miami Marlins 2-0, and the Arizona Diamondbacks. How about the Diamondbacks? Finished last place in the league a couple years ago, and they're on to the NLDS. They swept the Brewers 2-0. In the ALDS, the Astros currently leading the Minnesota Twins 2-1. Game 4 of that series is tonight in Minnesota. First pitch at 7:07 Eastern Time. I don't know why we do this with the 07s. I really, like, I mentioned this last year on the show. I don't remember if I think I was talking about opening day. I mentioned it last year. I don't know why they do that. I really don't know why. But there's some games during the season that'll, like, first pitch is like 7:38 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's like, just say 7:30. Like, I don't understand. Anyways, so Game 4 of that series is tonight. That game is going to be on Fox Sports 1. The Astros can advance to the ALCS with a win tonight. The other ALDS series, I already mentioned the Texas Rangers sweeping the Baltimore Orioles 3-0. The Rangers are on to the ALCS for the first time since 2011. In the National League, the Arizona Diamondbacks are one win away from knocking out the Los Angeles Dodgers and heading to the NLCS. What a run that would be for the Diamondbacks. And Game 3 of that series is tonight in Arizona at 9:07 on TBS. That would be, the Dodgers have won 100 games plus for like 5 straight years. I think they've gotten to the NLCS once. I saw that pop up on social media yesterday. I was like, wow, that's crazy. Yes, they won the World Series in 2020, but that was a result of, a shortened season. They didn't really have any true road playoff games. Not trying to discount the Dodgers championship, but I'm just throwing that out there. And then the other series, the Atlanta Braves and the Philadelphia Phillies, that series is tied at 1. Game 3 is tonight in Philadelphia at 5:07 on TBS. And I should mention the Dodgers Diamondbacks game is going to be on TBS as well. That Atlanta versus Philadelphia series, I truly believe that whoever wins that series is going to win the World Series. I really think so. I honestly think that we are going to see, my personal opinion, I think the Phillies get out of this series, and I think it is a Phillies versus Rangers World Series matchup. I think Philadelphia wins. I mean, to be completely honest, I think either the Braves or the Phillies, whoever wins that series, I really honestly see winning the whole thing. I think that those two teams right now are both on a roll. They're on, collision course right towards each other. It's going to be an interesting matchup. It's already tied 1-1, and we kind of know this thing is going to, this thing is going to 5 games. I really truly believe that, but we'll see how it goes the rest of the series. So thanks for tuning in. We're going to take just a short break, and then I'm going to come back and talk about the Sabres season, who I think is going to make the NHL playoffs, all that sort of stuff. And then I'll finish the show talking about the Bills and making my NFL picks for this week. Of course, the Bills at home on Sunday Night Football against the New York Giants at 8:20 Sunday night. Thanks for tuning in to Big Blue Sports Podcast here on WCVF 88.9 FM, the campus and community voice of Fredonia.
someone to kiss, someone to kick you. There's nothing that you couldn't slip through. Or at least that's the impression I get. Cause you're smooth and you're wet and she's not aware yet. But she's yours and she'll be saying use me. Show me the jacuzzi. I imagine that it's there on a plate. You're our rendezvous rate. Means that you'll never be frightened to make them wait for a while. I doubt it's your style not to get what you set out to acquire. The eyes are on fire. You are the unforecasted storm.
And welcome back to Big Blue Sports Podcast. So last season, when the Sabres ended their year and they were just one game shy of making the playoffs, I think there was a general sense around Buffalo that this team is so close. They're right there. You know, and I think that if the NHL app would stop just randomly playing videos, that would be marvelous. I don't want to see the Golden Knights banner raising. There's a reason I didn't watch it last night. But when the Sabres season ended last year, you know, it was tough. It was because you knew that you had a team that offensively could pack a punch. You know, you knew how good this team was offensively, meaning, you know, they can score 5 or 6 goals a game. But the main issue with the Sabres was, of course, defense and goaltending. There were a lot of question marks there. Going into this season, how I feel about it, you know, a lot of the team I'm really honestly not worried about. Like I said even at the end of last year that I really genuinely believe this is going to be a playoff season for the Sabres. I really honestly think so. You know, I think that goaltending is a little bit of a concern, I would say. I think Devin Levi is really good, but he's also really young and really inexperienced, you know? So I would have liked Buffalo to have gone out and gotten, you know, an established veteran to pair with him in the offseason, but at the end of the day, you know, I understand they feel confident in their guys, you know. In the preseason, I missed some of the preseason and I'm just going off of what I hear, but from what I understand, Eric Comrie was relatively solid in the preseason. I didn't see a Comrie game. I saw a couple of Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen preseason starts. There was a lot left to be desired there. I was not really sold on UPL based on his preseason performance. And I think it is a little risky rolling with the same 3 goalies who really, that's not fair to say they all struggled. Levi was good, but I mean, Comrie and Luukkonen really struggled at several points in the year. You know, they were so inconsistent. It was like for Comrie would be really solid for like 5 or 6 games, and then he would be terrible for 2 weeks straight. And then he would be solid again, and then he would be terrible. And then for Luukkonen, it was even worse. For UPL, it depended on the game. Sometimes in an individual game, Luukkonen would have like you know, sometimes Luukkonen would like have a great first period, make some great saves. Then he'd let in 2 complete softies in the second period. And it would be like Luukkonen would have a great game, then a terrible game, then a decent game, then a not so good game. And it's just like there was no consistency to either one of their games last year. That is going to have to change if Buffalo wants any shot at making the playoffs this year. What else is going to have to change is their defense. Buffalo defensively was flat out terrible last year. I mean, no sense beating around the bush or sugarcoating anything. Their defense was awful last year. It's true. But I think they've taken some steps to improve that. They went out and they signed Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson, who are not necessarily big names. I mean, Eric Johnson, yes, but Eric Johnson is well past his prime, as we know. But this is more, I think, for defensive depth. I think what we're seeing right now, the defensive pairs that they've been working with, Granato has kept Rasmus Dahlin and Matthias Samuelsson together on the top pairing, and they work very well together, as we've seen. He has Owen Power still with Henry Jokiharju, which I really don't know how I feel about that. And then he has the two new signings together, Johnson and Clifton. And then Jacob Bryson is the seventh. Bryson had an awful season last year. Bryson was maybe the worst Buffalo Sabre last year, and that's saying a lot. But he is the seventh defenseman to start the season this year. All reports are that he had a good camp, and I hope so. I like Jacob Bryson. I want to see him do well, He's a guy who I think has the potential to have an NHL career, but, last season was atrocious. He's going to have to be a lot better than he was last year if he wants a shot on this roster. And there are some guys, Victor Olofsson, there were a lot of rumors that Buffalo's going to trade him this past summer. Honestly, I think that may have been the plan until Jack Quinn got hurt. Now that Jack Quinn's going to be out for, at least the first few weeks of the season. They were originally targeting mid-December, I thought, but now it might be something else. I don't know, but so we'll have to see about that. See if when Quinn comes back, does Olofsson get dealt? The other thing is, where does Zach Benson fit into the forward core? Do you play Ben? Do you break up your top line of Jeff Skinner, Tage Thompson, and Alex Tuck to put Benson on the right? That's what they did in the preseason. They rolled with a line of Skinner, Thompson, and Benson, and they played well together. And I think you've got to put Zach Benson with those top guys in order to, he's going to develop. Benson has so much potential. He could be an absolute star in this league. And Matt Savoy is the other one too. Matt Savoy, we know, is good. He's battling back from an injury right now. And I don't know. It's interesting to see where certain guys are going to fit into the puzzle. This is going to be fascinating to see how all this plays out, how they work with their young talent, because the Sabres, with all the young talent they have on their roster right now, they have several more young forwards, good young forwards, that are on the way. So at some point, something's going to have to give, So I'm absolutely fascinated to see how this turns out. In terms of, do I think the Sabres are going to make the playoffs? Yes, I do. But who else is going to join them? So it has come the time for me to be, once again, hilariously proven wrong, as I am going to make my season playoff predictions for the 2023-2024 NHL season. Who do I think is going to make the playoffs? We'll start out west, just to be different. We'll start in the Pacific Division. The Vegas Golden Knights right now, I think, are still the best team in that division, right? I think that Vegas, of course, winning the Stanley Cup last year, I think Vegas, again, wins that division. Other teams in the playoffs, I think the Edmonton Oilers make it as the number 2 seed from the Pacific. And then the third place team out in the Pacific, it's tough because there's a few that I think might make it. I'm going to go with the Los Angeles Kings. I think the Kings have a solid young core, similar-ish to the Sabres, and I think LA makes it. So Vegas, Edmonton, and LA are my teams from the Pacific. In the Central, I still think the Colorado Avalanche. I think Colorado is the best team in that division. The Avs win it. I think Dallas finishes second. And then third place in the Central, I'll be unoriginal. I'll go with the Minnesota Wild. So Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota. I think it's going to be a lot of the same teams that we saw from last year. There weren't a ton of like huge earth-shattering moves in the offseason. So I think a lot of the teams that made it last year are going to make it again this year. In the Metropolitan Division, I think the New Jersey Devils are the most fun and exciting team in hockey right now. Lindy Ruff takes those guys to a Metropolitan Division title. Carolina finishes second, and then I think the Rangers finish third, backstopped by Shesterkin. So New Jersey, Carolina, and the Rangers in the Metro. In the Atlantic, see, it's tough. I think here's my take on this. I believe the Florida Panthers will win the Atlantic Division. I think Florida is going to be really good again. I think Florida wins the Atlantic. I think the Tampa Bay Lightning finish second. Third place in the Atlantic Division. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think the Buffalo Sabres finish third in the Atlantic Division. Buffalo finishes better than the Leafs. I can practically hear like half the province of Ontario screaming at me right now as I say that. Southern Ontario, of course, is mixed between Sabres and Leafs fans. I can pretty much hear the entire city of Toronto and like all of the surrounding areas screaming at me and telling me all the different ways that I'm wrong. But my thing with Toronto, and I still think Toronto's a playoff team. I do. I think Toronto gets the top wildcard spot. I think the Leafs just, listen, they've got their core four. They've got Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Riley, and Tavares. So I guess they're core five. Other than that, what does Toronto really have? I mean, when those guys, when they don't have multiple of their core guys on the ice, that's not a great hockey team. I'm not going to lie. It's a fine hockey team. It's a playoff team, but it's not anything overly special. So I think Toronto gets the first wild card in the East, the second wild card, because I don't mean to trash the Metro, but it's just not as good as the Atlantic. I think the Leafs make it. I think Ottawa makes it. I think the Ottawa Senators make it in as the last wild card in the Eastern Conference. In the West, I think your wild card teams are, I think, I'm going to go a little bit unoriginal. I think Nashville makes it as the top wild card. And I'm not going to pick Chicago. I know there's a lot of people who think, Bedard's going to take it to the playoffs. No, you need a whole team, not just one player. And then the second wild card spot, I think, is going to go to the Seattle Kraken. So I think Nashville and Seattle are your wild cards in the West, Toronto and Ottawa in the East. So that's who I think is going to make it. And then once we get into it, I'm not going to pick who I think is going to win the Stanley Cup just yet. I'll get there, but right now I just wanted to pick who I think is going to be in it because I got to make my NFL picks. I got to talk about the Bills and all that sort of stuff. So rest assured, we will get to that. We will talk about it in a minute, but we're going to take a quick break and then come back and finish out the show. Thanks for tuning in to Big Blue Sports Podcast here on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia.
Sitting going nowhere like the one and only. 'Cause even when you're going down, you always come back up around. You're a good friend of mine. You shine when you're feeling lonely. Just shine. You're my one and only. 'Cause even when you're going down, you always come back up around. You're a good friend of mine. You shine. You shine. You shine. You shine.
And welcome back to Big Blue Sports Podcast. Well, I mentioned at the top of the show, I have to talk about the Bills. Sunday's game, could anything have been more of a colossal mess for Buffalo? I mean, you're playing on, in the whole turf field thing is just, the whole turf field thing is just that is enough of a battle. It's between that and you're playing over in London, right? That's a 5-hour time change. The Jacksonville Jaguars have already been there for over a week because they played there last week too. So they've had plenty of time to acclimate. Why? Who thought it was a good idea for the Bills to leave Thursday night? Who thought that was a good idea? Buffalo's going to have a lot of questions to answer, and they rightfully should. There's a lot of things that Buffalo screwed up this week. And that's why their record is sitting at 3-2. That's why when you can't take care of business, this is why we're sitting here in 2023 talking about a team. This is why people say your window's closing. It's not. Don't get me wrong. It's not. But this is why people are saying it is, because you can't take care of business when it matters. I mean, it is mind-boggling to me. Who would even think that it would be a good idea to leave that late and not give your body enough time to acclimate to the time difference? No wonder they looked slow. They looked sluggish. They looked terrible. They couldn't get any of their footing. Now you've got two guys who are quite possibly out for the season on top of the two that already were out for the season coming into last Sunday. I mean, by my count, you've got like 8 different players who in the last 2.5 seasons have suffered season-ending injuries. 2 guys twice with Trey White and Tommy Doyle. You just got Von Miller. It's the second year in a row. Second year, you realize this? Second year in a row that one guy comes back from a season-ending injury, the same game, like clockwork, another defensive star goes down with a season-ending injury. Second year in a row that's happened. Last year on Thanksgiving, Trey White's first game back. Boom, Von Miller, torn ACL, done for the year. Then Sunday's garbage fest in London. Von Miller's back. Boom, Matt Milano, done for the year. Daquan Jones, done for the year. I shouldn't say that because we don't know that they're officially done for the year. But you know what I'm saying. It's like these injuries just pile up, and it's nobody's fault it's not players' fault that guys are getting injured. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's I think I texted because I was home for fall break. I had texted a friend of mine, and I said, can we have literally anything nice as Buffalo sports fans? Anything at all? Because every time we have hope, it is crushed into a million pieces. Like every single time. I mean, I'm not saying the season's over. It's not. You can't count them out. But it is going to be really difficult now that you've got multiple defensive stars that are out either for the rest of the season or for at least a while. So the injuries pile up, and then you come out in games and you just look flat. And it's like, there's no reason for it. There's no reason why they should be coming out flat like they did against the Jets. Did they practice this week? Didn't look like it. Just going to throw that out there. Sure didn't look like it. But anyways, the Bills are back in action on Sunday night at home against the New York Giants. That's a game that you can't lose. You just can't lose that game. That's if you want any shot with your defensive players out. If you want any shot at being at the top of the AFC, you have to take care of business in the games where you're playing a team that you are better than. And that is the case on Sunday night. The Bills have to come away with a win over the Giants. Their next several games, apart from one or two, are very winnable. So if they want to get to where they want to get to, I'd suggest they take care of business. Anyways, I'd like to finish out the show like I always do, making my picks for this upcoming week. Tomorrow night, 8:15, the Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Denver Broncos. Do we think the realistic question is, do we think the Broncos will give up 70 points again? I think it's entirely possible. I mean, the Broncos are actually one of the worst football teams I think I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how they won a single game, but that's what happens when you play the Bears. The Chiefs are 99% of fans picking the Chiefs to win that game, like I'm going to pick the Broncos. Come on. Of course I'm picking the Chiefs. Then we get to the London game because we're still playing those. The Baltimore Ravens taking on the Tennessee Titans. Ravens at 3-2, Titans 2-3. 85% of voters going with the Ravens. I'm going to agree. I think Baltimore, they look good offensively. They've stumbled a couple times, but the Ravens are a solid football team. Then we get into the 1 o'clock games. The Atlanta Falcons hosting the Washington Commanders. 68% of voters going with the Falcons. I'm going to go with Washington. I'm actually surprised. I think Washington is better than Atlanta. I know they just lost to the Bears, which is embarrassing in its own right, but I don't know. I think that I have a good feeling about Washington going into this game. I think they're still an okay team. The Minnesota Vikings heading into Chicago to take on the Bears. 67% of voters going with the Vikings. I'm going to pick the Bears. Seriously, come on. The Seattle Seahawks heading into Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. 66% of voters going with the Bengals. I'm going with Seahawks. The Bengals don't look good right now, and the Seahawks are solid. They're 3-1. I'm going with Seattle. The San Francisco 49ers heading into Cleveland to take on the Browns. 96% of voters going with the 49ers. This is nothing against the Browns at all. The Browns are a decent team. It has everything to do with the fact that San Francisco is really, really good. The Carolina Panthers, the last winless team, going into Miami to take on the 4-1 Dolphins. 99% of voters going with the Dolphins. I'm going to pick Miami in that one as well. The Indianapolis Colts heading to Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. 86% of voters going with Jacksonville. With Anthony Richardson out, I think Gardner Minshew can work some magic. Ultimately, I think Jacksonville wins. A very close game, though. The New Orleans Saints heading into Houston to take on the Texans. 71% of voters going with the Saints. Again, I'm going to go the opposite route. I'm going to pick the Texans. I think the Texans have played some solid football this year. Now we get into there's only one 405 game. The Patriots heading into Vegas to take on the Raiders. 86% of voters picking the Raiders. I'm going to go with the Raiders as well. The Patriots look terrible. The 425 games, the Lions going into Tampa to take on the Bucs. This could actually be a good game. 85% of voters going with the Lions. I'm going to pick Detroit as well. I think that's going to be a good game, though. 425, the Arizona Cardinals heading to L.A. to take on the Rams. 95% of voters going with the Rams. I'll go with the Rams as well, although I think the Cardinals can keep it close. The Philadelphia Eagles at 5-0 heading into New York, or should I say New Jersey, to take on the New York Jets. 96% of voters going with the Eagles. I got to go with the Eagles as well. The Sunday night football game, the New York Giants heading up here to Orchard Park, New York to take on the Buffalo Bills. I will be at this game. It will be raining. It will be fun. 99% of voters going with the Bills. Let me tell you, the Bills better win. I'm going with Buffalo in that one. And the Monday night game, the Dallas Cowboys heading to L.A. to take on the Chargers. 52% of voters going with the Cowboys. That could be a close game. I'm going to pick Dallas. I don't really believe in the Chargers. I think Dallas ends up coming away with the win in that game. So that'll do it for another episode of Big Blue Sports Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I would like to thank everybody for not only tuning in, but everybody at Fredonia Radio Systems who makes this show possible. We'll be back next week to hopefully recap a Bills win over the New York Giants, but we'll see about that and get started with this NHL season. And, of course, the Major League Baseball playoffs roll on, as do Fredonia Sports. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch you next week on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. Have a good one, everybody.